Goedemiddag allemaal. Heeft iedereen een plekje kunnen vinden? Staan er nog mensen buiten? Nee, ondanks het mooi weer. Nou, welkom bij de DGA-dag van 13 mei. Het is leuk om iedereen hier te zien. Ik heb heel veel naar uitgekeken. Om te beginnen, vandaag zullen we de rest van het programma in het Engels doen, omdat we ook een aantal Engelse sprekers hebben en ook bezoekers. En omdat wij als Nederlanders graag laten zien hoe goed wij Engels kunnen. Dus we gaan vandaag zo, ik switch zo even naar Engels, maar dan weten jullie waarom. En nou, dat ga ik bij deze doen. En ik zal dus ook in het Engels mezelf introduceren. Welcome everybody for being here today. And I'm going to make sure not to fall off the podium. I'm limping a little bit because I tried to play basketball again for the first time in 10 years. And I forgot I'm not 20 years old anymore. So my name is JP from the Dutch Game Garden. We're an incubator accelerator in Utrecht, the Netherlands, and we're one of the actual initial co-founders of the Dutch Game Association a couple of years ago. And I'm really excited to see where it is today. So I will happily introduce Horst in a minute. Horst Streck is the director, the chairman, I should say, of the Dutch Game Association since about a year ago. And a lot of exciting things have happened. And he's going to tell you about that right now. So I would like a warm applause for Horst Streck.
Hope, yes, it works. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for coming here. It's my pleasure, and we have a nice program coming up for you. JP will talk about that later. What is the gaming industry all about? In my opinion, it's about what you see at the screens here. It's about gamers that can play our games that we make on various platforms. And that's also the important thing, realizing what platform is good for you and good for your games. Will people keep on playing on mobile? Probably, yes. Or tablets, or still on the desktop? And what innovations will happen? Will it be the HoloLens from Microsoft, or maybe virtual reality? Who knows? Well, last week I finally visited with JP Finland, and I got some great insights there and a lot of stuff to learn. It was very, very interesting. But it was also an awareness that, in my opinion, we are not that far behind. They have about 250 studios, 2,500, a little bit above employees working in the gaming industry. Good educational system, we all have that as well. But we are smaller and with more people, a great infrastructure, so why not be on the same level as the Finnish competition, I ask. We were invited at the forum and everybody gave a presentation. Of course, Finland, with the great numbers of their industry. I talked a little bit about our Dutch culture, food out of the wall and wooden shoes and stuff like that. But also some insights. And the people there see us as financially very capable. That's an interesting thought. But what struck me the most is I was at a round table, it was square of course, with people on the right that looked like hard rock guys with long hair, black hair. And in front of me, somebody with a t-shirt, Angry Birds. And on the other side, somebody in a suit. But when it comes to games, we all speak the same language. We're all the same. And I think that's because we all recognize the great potential of games. And I'm saying that, but there are a couple of people who said it better than me. And I want to show you that by our teaser that hopefully will start now.
Games hebben een soort magische mogelijkheid om je de suggestie te geven dat dat wat je meemaakt aan ervaring, dat het komt door dingen die je zelf doet.
Dat is fascinerend. Er bestaat niks als videogames.
I'm sorry that's in Dutch, but the final remark was, er bestaat niets als videogames. And my free translation is, there's nothing like video games. And with that, I want to finish my welcome word, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.
All right. Limping Jack. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Yes, Finland. It was a great, exciting experience because there was also a couple of things that we're actually better at than they are, I think. One is the educational programs we have in the Netherlands. I think we are ahead of them. And also the integration between that and companies and a dedicated game incubator. There's not one there. So that's exciting. But yes, it was a very good trip, and it was really something that was very beneficial for us as an industry to make the next step. So let me look at those cards, because they're actually designed to help me not forget to say some things to you. So I'm going to actually introduce the speaker who flew in with what they call, a in and out. It's going back to the UK tonight, came just on time for this meeting. Berni Good. She is CEO and founder of Cyber Psychologists Limited. That's why I have the card. Thank you very much. She is an expert in cyber psychology in video games. She works with academics and game developers to offer advice and research around the behavior of the gamer. And she has a background in video game industry and publishing, and her latest research focuses on the scientific psychological understanding of video games. I have to read this from a card, I'm sorry. Of video game play types and how gaming experiences can be extended to all demographic. Berni is the go-to expert for the media around the psychology of the gamer in Britain. A warm applause for Berni Good, please. And before you start taking notes really dramatically fast, she will be sharing this presentation on the Drives platform, so you'll be able to read it, find the links, and even have a lively discussion about what you've heard. So you can just pay full attention to the presentation. Thank you, Berni.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I want to thank the team, the DGA team, who are really trying to do some interesting things here. They're really trying to give you guys who are at the forefront of developing applied and entertainment games and give you brilliant resources. And so I want to thank the team for having me, and I want to thank you all for attending. Just to reinforce what was just said, this presentation I'm going to give is quite text heavy. And the reason I do that is, in my experience, when I do my talks, people email me afterwards and ask me for the reference for the scientific piece of literature that I might be presenting. So all of the, in brackets, as we move through the presentation, there's a little bit more text, and then there's a reference to where the original paper came from. So please don't worry about making any notes. It'll be available on the DGA forum, and I'd be really keen to hear any discussions that you might have about the research, how you think it might be useful, and what your thoughts are in terms of using it around development. So I'm going to just quickly start now and move on, because I know we have quite a tight schedule. I know God's going to give me a 5-minute countdown, and we'll try and leave some room for questions afterwards. Sadly, I have to disappear quite soon straight away after my talk. But let's get together on this forum and talk about if you guys have any questions. And certainly anybody could email me separately if they need to. So just a bit of background about me really quickly. My name's Berni Good. I'm a psychologist. I'm a member of the British Psychological Society, and my aim is to bridge the gap between the academic research that we have, because psychology is a science, the academic objective research that we have, and look how we can use that in the development of games to really increase the experience for the player, but certainly when we're developing applied games, how we can really understand the psychology so that we can have more efficacy, so the game can be more effective. Okay, so we'll move quickly through. If it seems like I'm passing on a slide, remember it's quite text heavy and all the references are there. Okay, so we've talked very quickly about what we're going to look at here. I'm going to be touching on, games that are just purely entertainment value, but also games that are applied. Examples of that, by the way, the companies that I work for, I've done lots of work with Microsoft, Jagex Games, Madfinger Games, CSR Racing, one of the games I've worked on quite a lot. And also then doing research around smoking cessation games and working with applied teams around that type of thing. Games to help alleviate isolation and loneliness for an increasing elderly population. That's a big problem in Britain and indeed Europe. So we're going to look at how we can use this psychology that's available and how we can use it in a really positive way. And we'll just touch on the future of what might come about from this kind of research. It's really important that we understand I'm one of 6 people in the world that actually do this. I lecture a lot at universities in England, and I'm really keen to get more psychologists involved in gaming to bridge the gap. So it's a relatively new field, so the research is quite limited, but the research that I do present is always very robust, and some of my peers who I work with will tell you I'm quite a critic when it comes to methodology around the science. Okay, a quick note, very importantly, ethics in terms of using psychology is massively important. We would always seek not to cause any psychological harm to vulnerable people and children in particular. I'm always happy to talk about ethics. In fact, I consult with a number of games companies who are developing games for young children and certainly vulnerable adults as well. So please do feel free to drop me a line if you want to discuss that. It's becoming increasingly more important. And we want to make sure we get it right because this is such a creative industry and we don't want to end up being over-regulated because we're, trying to coerce a player rather than sort of, gently entice them in a positive way. So I'm going to touch really quickly on a piece of research called the Uncanny Valley. Has anybody heard of the Uncanny Valley? Okay, brilliant. Okay, lots of game developers put their hand up and tell me that. This is the first time we have a piece of research around this phenomena and the first time we understand psychologically what's happening and the perils of pitfalls and not getting this right. We see disengagement from a gamer, and I'll explain why the gamer doesn't even know why they want to come away from your game. If you get this right, you'll get a lot of stickiness and a lot of desire for continuation to play your games. So for those people who don't know the Uncanny Valley, it's been covered and talked about extensively. It's a psychological phenomena, and it's been covered extensively by people who you would expect. Jenks, who's a psychiatrist, and Freud has a lot to say about it as well. And if you look at this graph, it's quite easy to explain. What happens if we move along the left-hand axis is when we observe a robot or a game character or some kind of cartoon character, we feel an affinity with them because we feel that they are like us. So if we start here, we have a mechanical robot first, and then we move up to a humanoid robot. There is a point and a peak where the individual, they don't know why they feel this, but they feel a sense of eeriness and a sort of a sense of, I want to disengage from this. And we're going to go and have a look why this is really, really important when you are designing game characters. Okay, so this was some colleagues of mine that came from Bolton University, and some of the key things around uncanniness and how people can just disengage when they're interacting with a character and not know why, is this lack of facial expression, in particular around the forehead and the eye area. So if we don't get that right, in this upper facial area, there's a problem for the viewer and the gamer. And they won't quite know why, but they will not want to be playing your game. A lack of human likeness in a character's voice is another phenomena, a psychological phenomena that we realize people want to come away from a game. And a lack of an over-exaggeration of the mouth during speech. So if you don't get that right, then people again become disengaged. And certainly a lack of synchronization between the character's speech and actually the character's lips and actually their speech. So these people at Bolton University thought, what's going on here? We think there's something to do with psychopathy. Psychopaths are incredibly interesting to study if we do have any psychologists in the room. And the people at Bolton University tried to understand what's going on from a viewer's perspective, from a gamer's perspective when they're viewing these things. And so they looked at the sort of traits that sort of psychopaths have, callousness being one of them, and, you know, lack of empathy, these kind of things. And they did some research around this. Took 129 participants. Keep in your mind, psychology is a science, so it's very robust and very objective. And they did 3 conditions. First of all, they had a human condition. And they then had a condition where the character had full movement in this upper eye area here. So when they talked, there was lots of fidelity around here. And then they had another character. That had a lack of this area. So around this area, it was very sort of, you know, one-dimensional and didn't move very much. These participants in this study reacted. This was they decided whether they thought something was psychopathic when they were looking at it, whether it gave them an eerie sensation, and it was in response to these characters screaming. So we basically all know, those people who put their hand up will know in the room that there's guidelines available about how to avoid the uncanny when you're developing a character. But if you keep these kind of ideas around what's the makeup of a psychopath, you know, callousness, dominance, coldness, this type of thing, the penny will drop about what I'm going to talk about. This is a very healthy visual marker of a non-psychopathic person reacting with fear. And you'll see that we have the eyebrows pulled up, raised and pulled together. And we've got raised eyelids and a number of other things. This is what a normal, healthy, non-psychopathic person this is the way they will respond to fear. Okay, so the results of this research unequivocally determined that the viewers, that the characters, the stimuli with this lack of facial movement in this very key area here came out as being more eerie, and that it evoked uncanniness in the viewer, in the gamer. So it was the condition, and of course males actually, the male characters, because they had male and female sort of humans and characters in this as well, and people always react a little bit more to a male psychopath than they do to a female psychopath. Although I will say female psychopaths can be a lot more dangerous. So it was the lack condition where we had this disabled area in the eye and the upper forehead, can't reinforce it enough, where that people had a sensation that they just didn't want to go there and they didn't quite understand why. So what does it mean for you guys when you're designing games? Okay, what's really important here is that it's the first time psychologists have an understanding of what is going on. And we actually think that, based on the research, that it's a evolutionary psychological phenomena whereby before we communicated with speech, the viewer would know whether somebody was going to come and club them over their head and steal their meat, or run away with their wife or something, and steal their things, by this response, these sort of emotions around this area here in particular, that are we subtly read in our subconscious. So people perceive this, dominance, coldness. They perceive that, in fact, they're dealing with a psychopath. So, and the viewer just becomes repulsed and don't know why they're repulsed. This research also, my colleagues at Bolton did this research with young children. It's the same for adults and children. They all feel that they are repulsed by something, that there's an eerie sensation, something's not quite right. And, of course, the more you get the human-like features, if you are developing a character that is supposed to be human-like, the more you get those features right and the emotional responses right from a graphical and a behavioural fidelity, the less likely you are going to have people disengaging from your game. So you will probably remember this character, those of us who've been around for years like me, Mary Smith from Heavy Rain. In 2006, when this character came out, lots of gamers were going, this is supposed to be an empathetic character, there's something not quite right. And the developers took it back to the drawing board. And I mean, she looks a bit scary, right? She doesn't look like someone you might want to trust to look after your kids. And so they took it back to the drawing board and they did a lot of work on it. Some games that get this graphical fidelity right, and I've been in a lab and I've researched this, where you have some of the games that do it really well. The Last of Us do it really, really well. For those of you who haven't played it, please, I would empower you to go and play that game, because the emotional reactions and responses that the characters have are very, very good. So, and also Activision have been doing some work with this guy called Irie online, so I would suggest that you go and have a look at that as well. So, we know that it's this fight or flight phenomena. Do I stay or do I go? And in fact, that's what's happening with the gamer. If the graphical fidelity is not right, then the gamer will move away. So what we're saying in a nutshell here is that when you are developing characters, if you're going to develop a character, don't try and make them too human-like unless you can get the graphical fidelity right. Make them a little bit less human-like and people will still feel they have a familiarity and an affinity with them. So it's not very good for the cosmetic industry. When my colleagues finished this research, they contacted a lot of plastic surgeons, and all of these plastic surgeons did not want to talk about this. Now we know why people feel that they're getting this Botox injection, but actually why people become a bit sort of repulsed and don't enjoy it. So that's very, very interesting as well. So I'm now going to look at character development. There's a number of pieces of research that are coming out that suggest, believe it or not in this room, that people will feel more of an emotional connection sometimes to the character in the video game that they are playing, or an NPC in a game, a non-player character, sometimes than they feel more of an affection to human beings. Now, this is quite an interesting phenomena that we're seeing as psychologists, and the impact that these virtual computer-mediated worlds are having on human behaviour. So you'll know that people really strive to be like the character in a game. My favourite game is a game called Halo, who some of you may know in this room, which I've been playing for many years and have wasted an awful lot of my life playing. And 2 years ago at Eurogamer, I was with my 16-year-old daughter, and I was running round after the dressed-up character of Master Chief to get a photograph of him. My affinity towards him is so strong. So for gamers, they really kind of fall in love with the characters. And we understand as psychologists, because the sort of stuff that people get from game playing, the sort of things that people get from game playing, a sense of competence and autonomy and being able to relate to other people, it narrows our sense of self. I'm going to move on very quickly because I'm getting a bit of a countdown here. For those people who haven't seen a film called Her, has anybody seen that movie in the room? Okay, so this movie, this gentleman falls in love with his operating system. I won't say too much other than that. If you haven't seen it, see it. If you've seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about how people can become so attached to a character, and a character that isn't human. Okay, social psychology, and the reason why games like Candy Crush are so phenomenally successful and why multiplayer happens. We now know as psychologists this is a lot to do with a lot of the grounded theories around what it means to be a social being. We're social beings, we're geared to interact with each other, and we have a couple of really interesting social theories that have been researched around games. First one is social identity theory. And so when you get toxicity, when a game comes out or a new platform comes out, and you get people online saying, that's a terrible platform, I'd never play that game, it's rubbish. We desperately need, as human beings, to belong to a group, Now, this psychology is responsible for prejudice and all sorts of things, and it's a psychological phenomenon where we have a real affinity to belong to a particular group. I'm going to just move quickly past that. Don't forget these slides are available, so if I am rushing, it's all quite easy to understand. This next theory, social determination theory, there is a book called Glued to Games, and it's by some colleagues. I use their research. They very kindly let me use their research in my postgraduate work, and it stems around a theory of psychology called eudaimonics. Eudaimonics is the theory of what it is that gives us a sense of well-being and what it is that makes us happy. Now, there's three key components to social determination theory: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And we're just going to quickly look through those. If you guys build into your games these three components, I've seen it happen, people will carry on wanting to play your game. So, relatedness. Everybody needs to relate to someone, and so when you are able to relate to a non-player character in a game, or someone else who you're playing the game with in a multiplayer environment, or someone you're talking about your game with on a social networking platform, that enables this really interesting sense of, relating to others in a meaningful way. Now, the book that's called Glued to Games is a step-by-step guide to incorporate these three theories into your game design and development. Not just entertainment games, but games that are used in an applied way as well. Competence. Quite often the press will phone me up and say, what do you think about violent video games? Why do we want to play them? Quite simply, you want to blow someone's head off in a video game or take out the boss, not because you want to be violent, but because you want to feel a sense of competence. In the real world, it's quite hard for us all to achieve a sense of competence every 10, 15 minutes, but in the gaming world, we get it all the time. So these are some of the reasons that gaming is so compelling and that people want to continue playing them. And again, on these slides, chaps, when you finish and you come onto the DGA web environment, there's some good tips here about what to do and how to build them into your games. The last one is autonomy. We get up in the morning, we have to go to work, we have to pay our bills, we have to visit family, we have to visit friends. Good games, really good virtual worlds and really good games allow us to make our own choices in the gameplay. So that's why games, one of the many reasons, another reason why games are so incredibly important for people. And again, I'll move quickly on through here because we are going to run out of time. Engagement and immersion, again, this is really interesting and massively important area of why and how your games will be successful. Without engagement and immersion in the video games, of the player in your games, you will not have desire for continuation to play. So what do we understand about engagement? Well, what's really interesting for us as psychologists is we're starting to see now, with mobile gaming increasing, that we have a different sense of immersion and engagement in the different contexts we're in. For example, we know that if people play a mobile game indoors, they don't get as much pleasure and immersion and engagement out of it as they would if they were playing it when they are on the move or outside. So these are kind of really important, interesting things to think about. The context of where people are playing, not just what they're playing, but where they're playing it, again, really massively important. And again, there's some more research here around the immersive experience, that sometimes it can be, even more immersive for people than just sitting around having a discussion, having fun and dancing. It's massively important, and it's really important in role-playing games that you tweak it and you get a lot of immersion. Presence is going to be key for virtual reality. Without presence, immersion and engagement, you're not going to have a very successful game. So character attachment and people enjoying the storyline of a game, we're going to see much more of that. Has anybody played Gone Home, the game? Yeah, I mean, if you haven't, I would empower you to. A massively successful game. People are very interested in having empathy and attachment to the character and the backstory of what's going on in the character's life. So we'll quickly just skip through this. This research around what is important to build into gameplay for people is reinforced by lots of other psychology bits and pieces of research. Sort of Get the storyline right. People are interested, if you can't have a story and narration through the game, give some idea of the backstory of the characters. It will make people keep coming back and playing your game. So just quickly just move across that. All of the literature that you need to look at around how we rate what are the most important experiences that people want for immersion in gameplay is all on here as well. Very quick note about free-to-play gaming, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to really speed up. Free-to-play gaming, some great research in South Korea. In fact, it doesn't matter if you make an absolutely brilliant game. If people are satisfied with your game, it doesn't mean that they're going to spend any money. You must build in value, a perception of value for the player. Quite often, people will contact me and say, how can we monetize our game? And I will say, it's too late, you've made it. You need to do it as you move through the game. So enabling the player to feel a sense of value, a sense of value for money is incredibly important. And it's all about perception. This is just a nice little piece of research in virtual reality. We now know that virtual reality, in terms of a gaming experience, is going to be more real to life. So we did some research around this and primed people to go in one of two conditions. In both conditions, it was they had to fly somewhere and rescue a child. In the one condition, you were a superhero, and in the other condition, you were, in fact, a passenger on a helicopter. Both conditions, actually, post the research, after you'd done this little task, both conditions, both times, the fact that we primed someone to be a superhero meant that the researcher, after the research, knocked on purpose a container of pens on the floor, and people just jumped up to help really quickly, more than they would have done had we not primed them to be a superhero. What we're saying as psychologists here is that there are, in the same way we have to be a bit worried about violence in virtual reality, this is a really good platform for people to, do a lot of, to reinforce pro-social behavior, to prime people to do lots of really good things. Mobile virtual reality, I don't quite know when that's going to happen. We've got a number of challenges. I don't know whether any of you are developing mobile, trying to develop or attempting to develop mobile VR games in this room. I think it's a few years off yet. There's just some discussion here for you to look at post the talk around sort of what people like Palmer Luckey, who have been working around this VR for many, many years, and what their perceptions are. Another area that's really interesting, neurogaming. So we can understand and get feedback from what's going on in the player's game. A really quick example of that, because I know I'm running out of time, a really quick example of that is I've been in a room where I've had a 19-year-old male involved in a very emotional game, and we've asked him to tell us when he feels emotional. And he sits there and he goes, no, no, no. But we know, because we're looking at his brain, we've got him wired up to all sorts of stuff, we know that actually, in fact, he is feeling emotion. So the fact that we can have this insight now into, the psychology and the brain of the player is really going to shake things up and change the industry. So if you do get time, there's a great conference called Neurogaming. They put all of their talks up free, and they're absolutely fascinating. You've got some people at the forefront of game design that's really looking at the brain and how the brain works. I apologize if I've run over time. Please accept my apologies. And I thank you all very much. Please come on board and listen to participate in the discussion that we're going to have. Do I have time for any questions?
But
so
we've
sorry.
already decided to book you for a full day the next time you come
Okay.
back, because this is awesome stuff.
Okay.
Yes.
This stuff can really make the difference between a massively successful game, a game that has really good efficacy in an applied way, and just to up the experience for the gamer.
Yeah.
So thank you all for your time.
A warm applause for Berni. Thank you very much. Great. Very nice.